Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week's Parsha has two of the greatest heroes of the Tanakh, of the whole Bible in it. The Meyaldot HaIvriyot, the midwives for the Jewish people. Why were they heroes? Pharaoh told them a very wicked decree. He said, take all the Jewish boys and drown them in the river. They did not. They did not comply with this murderous genocidal order, and instead they continued to give life to the Jewish children. Now, who were they? There's a debate in the Mefarshim, in the commentators. Were they Egyptian women who were tasked with giving birth to the Hebrew babies, or were they Hebrew midwives who were tasked to work with their own people? The debate goes back and forth. I found something very interesting in the commentary, actually, of our Chumash that we use upstairs, the Hertz edition Chumash, who points out something fascinating about these women based on the only character description we get about them. The Torah tells us one thing about these women, who they were. It says that they were Yirat Elokim. They were people who had fear of God. Fear of God. Yirat Shamayim, Yiras Shamayim, Yirat Elokim. They feared God, and that's why they did what they did. Now, Yiras Shamayim is a wonderful thing, very important thing. It's a great compliment you can give to someone. Say, oh, that person has real Yirat Shamayim. What does it mean, though? I think a lot of us associate it with kind of a frumkeit, right? They have a lot of Yirat Shamayim, means they daven all the time, they really have kavanah when they daven, they have a sense of the divine in their lives and act with the fear and awe that's appropriate to that. But the Hertz edition says something surprising. He says that if you look in the Torah itself, that phrase, Yirat Elokim, is predominantly associated with non-Jewish nations. Non-Jewish nations. He talks about how Avraham, when Avraham is going into Egypt, and he fears for his life because of Sarah, they think he's going to kill him. He says, this is a place that does not have Yirat Elokim. Egypt is a place that does not have Yirat Elokim, and they're going to murder me on account of my beautiful wife. He mentions Yosef. Yosef, when he's still in disguise as an Egyptian, and his brothers have come to beg for food, and the whole saga of the end of Bereshit plays out. When he's still pretending to be an Egyptian, he uses that phrase, I have Yirat Elokim, I have fear of God. And he notes how Amalek, the great arch enemy of the Jewish people, our polar opposite in the Torah, says that they attack the Jewish people from behind and attack the weak, the stumbling, because they did not have Yirat Elokim. So we see that Yirat Elokim, fear of God, is a concept associated universally, not just about following halacha, but about a kind of a moral sense that goes beyond the boundaries of the Jewish people. And that's proof, says Hertz, that the Meyaldot HaIvriyot, the midwives in our parsha, were probably not Jewish. They were probably Egyptian midwives, which gives their act of resistance that much more power, because not only were they standing up for what was right, they were putting themselves at risk for the other, for a vulnerable and oppressed people. Very powerful stuff. But I want to take this concept of Yirat Shamayim one step further. We see that Yirat Shamayim in the Torah means having a moral sense of what's right and wrong, and standing up and doing what's right, even when there might be very serious consequences for it. And it's not just for the Jews, it's for the whole world. This is a moral sense, a sense that there's something above me. There's justice and God above me that I'm accountable to. That's what Yirat Shamayim is, no matter what your religion or your ethnicity. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot, Hakol bidei Shamayim chutz mi Yirat Shamayim, that everything is in the hands of God. Everything is in the hands of God. Everything is playing out according to God's will, except for one thing, our own Yirat Shamayim. And again, I think that doesn't mean our own sense of how frum we are, but rather our own, according to the Torah's view, deep moral compass and our capacity to stand up and say, this is right and this is wrong in times when it might be difficult to do so. That's up to us. Everything is in the hands of heaven except that, but that's probably the most important thing. This is, by the way, the story of Moshe, right? Moshe could have led in our parsha a life of extreme comfort and power and privilege in the house of Pharaoh. But instead, he goes out and he sees his Jewish brothers and sisters suffering, and he speaks out and he takes action. And he sacrifices all of that power to go on this crazy quest to liberate the Jewish people and bring them into Eretz Yisrael and give them the Torah. That's Yirat Shamayim. That's fear of God. To stand up for what's right. To say this slavery is wrong and I'm going to do something about it. Moshe is a hero. There have been times in human history where we have risen to those moments of Yirat Shamayim, whether as Jews or as nations in the world. And of course, there have been times when we failed. We failed as a world to stand up for what's right and good. And there are times in our own lives. I can think of times in my life when I stood up even against pressure or people who were saying don't do it, to stand up for what's right. And there are times when I haven't. There are times when I was quiet or didn't take the action that was needed. All of us have that choice as individuals, as nations, and as a world where things are at an inflection point. And we can choose to stand up and do what's right or choose to not. We have models in our Parsha of Moshe and of the Meyaldot HaIvriyot who feared God, who had that moral courage to stand up and do the right thing. And I think a lot of us are thinking about these issues in the last week as we've seen so many crazy things that we never would have imagined playing out in America. And yet I want to highlight and strengthen those with moral courage who stood up, who said this is wrong, and who kept our democracy going and functioning. It's so important now. It was important in the past, and it will be important in the future for individuals and elected leaders and all of us to act with moral courage. This is not it's not partisan, it's not about left or right. It's about a sense of responsibility to a moral order that goes beyond one's immediate needs and interests, that is accountable to someone and something beyond my boss or my supervisor or whoever's around me telling me to do something that's not right. This is what the Torah is about. It's about cultivating that sense of morality and justice in each and every one of us. That's what Avraham Avinu was about. That's why Hashem says, I have chosen Avraham because he will preserve the way of God, v'shamru derech Hashem, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do righteousness and justice, him and all the generations after him, and that includes us. So in these moments of great moral uncertainty and moments where there's a lot of moral questions that are floating around and people acting in a lot of different and sometimes very scary ways, let's strengthen each other to have the moral courage to stand up for what's right, to do what's right, no matter who's telling us or what voices we hear around us. If we know what's right and good, to stand up and say it clearly and loudly, and to not just say it, but to do something about it, to not just post about it, but to take actions that are leading us in the ways of righteousness and goodness. And I know these are complicated. Righteousness and goodness are not always simple. It's not always clear what's right and good. But Hashem gave us seichel. He gave us a mind. And Hashem gave us a heart. He gave us a leiv. And Hashem wants us, I believe, to be working, to always be thinking, what is the correct moral thing in this situation? How can I advance the cause of righteousness and justice in the world? Not in a crazy ideological way, just by looking and seeing what's in my wheelhouse. Where is my power? How can I make this situation more right, more just, more good? That's really what the message, I think, of this parsha is about, what Sefer Shemot is about, and again, what our whole Torah is about. So may we be zocha to follow and be inspired by the model of the Meyaldot HaIvriyot. Whether they were Jewish or Egyptian, it doesn't actually really matter. What matters is they stood up and did the right thing. What matters is that Moshe stood up and did the right thing. And may we stand up and do the right thing in the situations which we find ourselves in. Political, personal, business, all the situations in our lives where we face moral challenges, and they're everywhere. They're in every sphere of our lives. May we be strengthened, and may we remember that Hakol b'dei Shamayim, everything is in the hands of heaven, chutz miyirat Shamayim, except for our moral choices. That's on us. So let's act wisely and strongly, and I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom.